I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed. Following that, my mother-in-law also said something terrible. A useless person should just get divorced and leave. Upon joining us, my father-in-law seemed to understand the situation and yelled, "A wife who can't bear children doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Roy quickly and let him marry Hannah." Being told such unreasonable things, I just stood there in silence. It was the first time in my life that I was made to feel so miserable. But at the same time, my resolve became unshakable. The time had come for me to raise the signal to counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I was hurt and about to cry, looking down on me like that. Defying their expectations, I said with a broad smile, "I'm already divorced, you know? And that woman." Hearing my words, my in-laws and Roy gasped in astonishment, uttering a pitiful "huh?" The betrayers were shaking upon discovering the shocking truth. My name is Emily, and I'm a 31-year-old part-time. I married Roy 3 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. When we got married at 28, I was working full-time, and continuing to work would have guaranteed a solid career. That's why I wanted to build my career until I turned 30, then have a child and return to work more easily once childcare became manageable. Roy understood that, and we agreed to start trying for a baby after I turned 30. So, when I turned 30 and was about to start trying in earnest, I went for a checkup just in case, as a friend who was also trying was struggling with infertility. The result was that I found out I have a condition that makes it difficult to conceive, and I decided to switch to part-time work to focus on fertility treatments. Roy works at a real estate company, and we can live comfortably on his salary alone. We were also able to save a little every month, so he was okay with me working part-time. But that's when the nightmare began. Once it became clear I had fertility issues and switched to part-time, Roy's attitude changed drastically. He used to be kind, but suddenly he said, "I'm full-time, you're part-time, so you should take care of everything at home. If I don't earn money, we can't even afford fertility treatments, let alone live. You need to perfectly manage the household to avoid stressing me out." I was good at household chores since I lived alone, so it wasn't too painful. But Roy started to nitpick everything. If the room was a bit messy, he'd say, "You're lazy. What kind of housewife leaves the room this dirty?" And if the dishes weren't washed right after a meal, he'd say, "A woman who puts off even this isn't cut out for a family. Then work more and earn. There are remote jobs and such hiring, right? Well, you're still in charge of all the household chores since you're part-time and I'm full-time." I had just found out about my infertility, so I was feeling down, thinking it was somehow my fault despite Roy being fine. So I wanted to create a relaxing space at home for Roy, who was tired from work, and tried to meet his expectations. Looking back, I realized Roy was just taking advantage of my weakened state. At that time, I convinced myself to endure until I got pregnant, suppressing my feelings. I thought Roy would return to his kind self once we had a child. Hoping for a sliver of hope, I continued with fertility treatments while managing part-time work and household chores. But the strain took its toll, my health deteriorated, fertility treatments weren't going well, and the gap between us grew. Gradually, I couldn't keep up with the housework, my feelings were a mess, and I became more emotional. Roy then said, "You can't even get pregnant and act all high and mighty. If you don't want to be divorced, listen to me." From that day, he clearly looked down on me. He said I was acting all high and mighty just because I asked him to put his socks in the laundry basket instead of leaving them around, and he yelled, "Shut up." So, I spoke up a bit more firmly. Being looked down upon like this made me feel miserable, and I didn't even know what to do anymore. And Roy began to treat me not as his wife but as a convenient woman or a servant, and my heart grew more and more troubled. A year passed in this way. Ultimately, we didn't have a child, and the gap between me and Roy remained. Switching to part-time work and starting infertility treatments, this past year has flown by in a flash. Yet, it's also been the most challenging and painful period of my life. But recently, there's been a change. Roy suddenly started being nice. Not just a little, it was a significant change. It was as if he had become a completely different person, showing more concern for me than ever before. For example, in a month when the infertility treatment didn't work and I was feeling down, he said, "You okay? How about I make dinner tonight? I can whip up your favorite beef stew." I was half touched, half suspicious. After all the times he'd looked down on me, to see such a drastic shift in behavior made me wonder if there was a catch. So, I asked Roy, "What's up? Anything good happened recently?" He relaxed his face and said, "Yeah, work's been going great. I got selected to be part of a big project. But it means I'll have to do more entertaining and weekend golf, so I might be away from home more." Up to this point, it was all good. My physical burden had lessened, and if Roy's work was going well, it meant our future was secure. If I just accepted Roy's kindness without question, there'd be no trouble. But there was one thing that bothered me. Lately, Roy had become keen on knowing my every move, so I asked him, "Hey, what's going on? You used to not care at all about where I was or what I was doing." Suddenly, Roy burst into anger. "What's wrong with wanting to know what my wife is up to? Emily, are you doing something behind my back that you can't tell me?" From my perspective, it was bizarre for Roy to yell over something so trivial. It seemed more like he was hiding something from me and was being overly nice to cover it up. A friend who had recently divorced told me how her husband started acting nicer just before his affair came out. That's why I started suspecting Roy of having an affair and began to closely monitor his movements as much as he did mine. Then I noticed a pattern. Roy would only go out on Tuesdays, and every second Sunday, he went golfing. On days other than those, if I asked casually where he went, he'd answer normally. But on those specific days, if I asked, he'd snap, "Geez, stop nagging me. It's annoying, you know." It was all too suspicious. I grew more convinced that Roy might be cheating and decided it was time to take serious action. A few weeks later, worn out from the ongoing covert battle with Roy, I needed a break and went on a little trip. It was about a 20-minute drive from our home, but I'd been wanting to check out this cafe that had just opened. I'd heard there might be a line, but I didn't mind waiting, so I went alone and waited for my turn. That's when I ran into my sister-in-law. She's 2 years younger than me, 29, works as a kindergarten teacher, and is bright and kind. She looks up to me like a real sister, and I dote on her like she's my actual sister. When I called out to her, she looked startled and scanned me from head to toe. She usually wouldn't do something like that, so her strange behavior had me tilting my head. "What's up?" At my voice, she blinked rapidly as if snapping out of it and, after a moment of silence, returned to her usual cheerful self. "Let's have lunch together," she suggested, so we changed the reservation to 2 people and sat down together after waiting for a bit. Over lunch, she told me a shocking fact that left me speechless, unable to even eat. After lunch, though originally planning to go home, I changed my plans. I decided to go to my in-laws' house with my sister-in-law. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from our apartment, a place I usually don't stop by. My in-laws aren't exactly fond of me, or rather, they don't like me much, so apart from Christmas, we don't see each other, making this visit quite rare. From the cafe, it's just over a 10-minute drive to their house. My sister-in-law lives alone and usually contacts her mom when she's coming home. But today we decided to go without notifying her. Today is the second Sunday. Roy was supposed to be at his usual business golf, but for some reason, when we arrived at my in-laws' house, Roy's car was parked there. My sister-in-law unlocked the door for us, and we entered. Immediately, my mother-in-law appeared and asked, without hiding her displeasure, "Oh, why is Emily here?" Just the fact that a daughter-in-law stopped by warranted this attitude. I barely managed to suppress a sigh. Then, from deeper inside the house, I heard voices of a man and a woman, and Roy and a woman popped out. Roy momentarily grimaced, but the woman smiled brightly and said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Hannah, and I'll be Roy's wife from now on." While I was stunned, my sister-in-law, with a furious look, confronted Roy and the others, demanding, Hey, what's this all about? Explain yourselves. Roy sighed deeply. Then, looking at me with a disdainful expression, he dropped a bombshell. I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed. Following that, my mother-in-law also said, a useless person should just get divorced and leave, hurling awful words at me. Strangely, while I managed to stay calm and rational, my sister-in-law, trembling with either anger or sorrow, gave me a look of sympathy. Meanwhile, Roy, Hannah, and my mother-in-law looked down on me with a smug attitude, showing no remorse. Then my father-in-law, attracted by the noise, came in and immediately understood the situation, yelling, "A barren wife doesn't belong in this family. Hurry up and divorce Roy and let him marry Hannah." "Dad," my sister-in-law shouted, trying to stop him, but I slowly raised my head. And that's when I signaled my counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I was hurt, about to cry from being looked down upon like this. Defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, though? And about that woman." The implications of my words, especially the fact that I mentioned I was already divorced, left Roy and my in-laws stunned, only able to utter a pathetic "huh?" I wanted to expose Hannah's true identity right then and there. But instead, I sighed and said, "Roy, do you remember the fuss a while ago? When you threatened to divorce me and prepared the divorce papers. Those papers were signed, so I did my part. We're not husband and wife anymore, without needing to be told." Roy, reminded of that incident, lost his earlier composure. Instead, he began looking around frantically, his unease palpable. A few days ago, Roy and I had a fight, and in a fit of rage, he signed the divorce papers and threatened me. The cause of the argument was trivial. I had simply asked him again where he goes every second Sunday. He always evaded the question, and I thought it was about time to get a straight answer. Roy, turning red, shouted in what's become a standard response, "You always ask that. Are you trying to control me? I'm not having it." I was merely asking where he was going, but his extreme reaction to my question about the second Sunday was absurd. Still, Roy kept ranting and stormed out of the house. I wondered where he had gone off to when he returned a while later with the divorce papers. He filled in his section in front of me, then pushed the papers at me, saying, "I can divorce you anytime I want." When I asked him if he really intended to divorce, he nodded emphatically. So, I secretly filled in my section too and kept the papers in my bag, ready to submit at any time. In a way, it was like a talisman. If anything happened, I could use these papers to dissolve our marital relationship, a magic piece of paper. And today, after running into my sister-in-law and hearing a shocking story, reaching my breaking point, I submitted the divorce papers before heading to my in-laws' house. Hearing this, Roy argued, "That was just a threat, I didn't mean it." But my sister-in-law retorted, "You signed it yourself saying you could divorce any time, that clearly shows intent," leaving him speechless again. Sarcastically, I said to Roy, "So, our marriage is pretty much in ruins. Happy now?" Roy was about to say something when his mother interjected with a smug look, "Oh, is that so? Well, we were expecting you to divorce anyway, so that's fine by us." It seemed like Roy's father shared the same sentiment, nodding in agreement. To my in-laws, my divorce from Roy was inevitable, so to them, it was more of a relief than anything else. Hannah, standing next to Roy with an annoying grin, seemed pleased with herself. Noticing this, Roy chuckled smugly, "Yeah, that means I can start my life with Hannah, the first step to our future together." It was disgusting. My sister-in-law looked frustrated, as if embarrassed by these four. To me, these clueless family members and Hannah were just too foolish to take seriously. Ignoring their triumphant looks, I pulled out my phone. Then, I showed Roy and the others a photo that clearly depicted Roy and Hannah in a compromising situation. Timestamped and location tagged. I said to Roy, "I didn't file for divorce on a whim. I've been compiling evidence of your affair from the start," I declared, watching Roy swallow hard. Glancing at him, I added that I intended to demand alimony, right when Hannah burst into laughter. Frowning at Hannah, she blurted out. "So, you've been investigating me too? About that woman, guess you figured it out. I was gonna reveal that I'm pregnant." Too bad, Roy and his parents already knew and even let me stay here on purpose. My sister-in-law was shocked. When we met at the cafe, she had already been informed by Roy and my in-laws that we had divorced. The reason they gave her was shocking. They claimed I was terminally ill and had decided to break up with Roy, who had supposedly made a tearful decision. Roy had told his sister a lie about breaking up due to a fake illness. Hearing this story, I was appalled. According to my sister-in-law, Roy had cautioned her. "Emily is despairing over her life now. So, please don't contact her and accidentally upset her." Hence, my sister-in-law avoided reaching out to me, thinking it was for my own good. But upon returning home, she was surprised to find a strange woman living there, introduced as Roy's new wife by my in-laws. She had realized she'd been deceived all along. But hearing about Hannah's pregnancy was new to her. As Hannah gloated, I burst into laughter. Then turned to her. "Of course, the detective caught that you're pregnant. But I brought something even more interesting since it's unlikely that Roy and his parents wouldn't know." The atmosphere tensed. Everyone held their breath, wondering what bombshell I would drop next. And the moment I opened my mouth, the silence was broken, and the situation drastically changed. "And what I wanted to say is, Hannah is pregnant with another man's child, not Roy's." Hannah's face paled, and Roy was speechless, while his parents slowly turned their gaze towards her. I had spared no expense on a detective to gather irrefutable evidence and information beneficial to me post-divorce. I had requested detailed investigation reports and evidence, including photos with date and time stamps. By the time of our divorce fiasco, I already had enough evidence to confront Roy. The reason Roy only left on Tuesdays and every second Sunday was because those were Hannah's days off from work. Roy inadvertently dug his own grave by filling out the divorce papers, making it a windfall for me. I could have cornered Roy with the evidence I had, but I thought it was too soon. That's because the detective had mentioned that Hannah, Roy's affair partner, seemed to have a dark shadow hanging over her. So, I decided to request a more detailed investigation into Hannah. It turned out Hannah was pregnant, and Roy was aware of it. This was somewhat expected. However, Hannah insisted on going to the doctor alone, stubbornly refusing to take Roy with her. It seemed Roy thought nothing of it. But Hannah had a clear intention to keep another man from suspecting anything. In reality, Hannah was involved with another man, a married man with children, and the child she was carrying was undoubtedly his. The married man, unable to leave his family for Hannah, had agreed to cut ties by paying all expenses related to the pregnancy and a lump sum for child support upon Hannah's request. The agreement was to settle their relationship by paying child support if a test after the child's birth confirmed his paternity. Therefore, it appears that this man was always accompanying Hannah to her doctor appointments, leaving no opportunity for Roy to join. Roy, unknowingly, had dug his own grave by signing the divorce papers, making my case even stronger. I had collected evidence of Hannah entering the maternity clinic with another man and even secured audio recordings, presenting all the proof to them then and there. As Hannah grew visibly distressed, Roy exploded in anger. "You deceived me?" Me, while his parents echoed his outrage. Feeling it was too harsh to gang up on a pregnant woman, I exclaimed, "Enough. This is shameful. You're all in the wrong here. Roy for cheating, his parents for condoning it, and Hannah for planning to use Roy as a fallback. Your actions are nothing but a petty quarrel." Silenced by my outburst, everyone was left speechless. Now that things have come this far, there's no turning back. I've made up my mind. After discovering Hannah's shocking hidden side, there's no way these people could live together anymore. But what I couldn't forgive was Roy. How he bad-mouthed and looked down on me while I quit my job to focus on fertility treatments, and how he suddenly started being nice to avoid suspicion the moment he started his affair. "I've divorced Roy, and I will make sure you all pay me alimony. Hannah, You'll be raising 2 children on your own now, but since you're the one who did this, you better take full responsibility." After saying that casually, Hannah turned pale and exclaimed in shock, "You knew about my other child? How? Where did you?" To make it clear for Roy and his bewildered in-laws, I started to explain. Hannah has been letting her parents raise her child. She claims to be providing financially, but with another child on the way, things will change. Her parents are getting older, and it seems she's been looking for a new ATM to help with child rearing. I have evidence of her saying this to her friends with a laugh. Realizing that ATM implicitly referred to him, Roy looked hurt. But he had no right to feel that way. The in-laws were flustered, and in a panic, my mother-in-law dropped her previous confident demeanor, saying, "So, Hannah's child isn't our grandchild? Then there's no reason to keep her in this house. Leave right now." Conveniently switching her stance. Hannah, in a panic, tried to defend herself. "No, it is Roy's child. Please believe me." But my sister-in-law finally spoke up. "Do you really think saying that now will make anyone believe you? Hannah, do you not realize the mess you've made of people's lives?" And with that, Hannah fell silent. Then, my sister-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Aren't you the mother of a boy who goes to the daycare where I work? The one always brought in by his elderly grandparents. His name wouldn't happen to be Henry, would it?" Hannah's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to respond but ended up closing it without saying anything. Her silence affirmed my sister-in-law's question. Shocked, my mother-in-law collapsed on the spot, and my father-in-law looked back and forth between us, panicking. It seemed like the right moment. I presented Roy with an ultrasound image, saying, "Thanks to the fertility treatments, I successfully got pregnant with your child. I was about to tell you after dealing with the morning sickness, but then your affair became undeniable. This child is undoubtedly yours. We won't be living together, but expect to pay child support." Roy looked devastated, but my audacious mother-in-law chimed in, "If there's a child, then she still has the right to be a wife. I'm sorry, we were just misled by this woman. Please, Emily, come back to us." Ignoring her, I turned to leave the house. As my mother-in-law called out to me repeatedly, I turned back once and said, "What are you doing? You never liked me from the start, and once you found out Hannah was pregnant with your son's child, what action did you take? You're beyond brazen." Taken aback by my confrontation, my mother-in-law lowered her head again. My father-in-law, perhaps realizing their folly, said nothing more. After all, they discarded me just as I no longer needed to acknowledge them as family. Stepping outside, my sister-in-law repeatedly apologized, asking if there was anything she could do. I said, "Just make sure they don't get away with this. From now on, I'll be handling things through a lawyer with Roy. And from now on, let's not be sister-in-law and sister-in-law, but friends instead." Surprised, my sister-in-law nodded and said, "Let's get through this together." Following that, I hired a lawyer and demanded alimony. They pleaded inability to pay the substantial amount I demanded, but after I threatened legal action and assured them of my relentlessness, they reluctantly agreed. Hannah's affair with the married man came to light, leading to a confrontation and eventually reaching his wife's ears, causing an uproar. Consequently, overwhelmed by our demands, Hannah turned to her parents, who, after scolding her, came to us to apologize and settled the amount in full. Hannah desperately turned to her parents' home for help. Naturally, she was severely scolded by her parents, who then dragged her to our place to apologize. After giving birth, Hannah will have no choice but to work from dawn till dusk, making it impossible for her to indulge in affairs ever again. Despite being incredibly irresponsible, given she has children, Hannah is now under the strict financial control of her parents, unable to find any release for her stress. Having lived selfishly until now, I hope she lives for her children from here on out. On the other hand, Roy faced a disastrous fate as well. While it was good he paid me the alimony, he had to sell the family home to come up with the money. Now, he and his parents are huddled together, living in a cramped, run-down apartment. Although I agreed to allow him to pay child support in installments, as expected, there were defaults. He probably thought a little delay would be fine, based on whatever he read online. I had warned I would be relentless. I promptly took legal action for enforcement. This resulted in his company being notified, revealing his divorce and child support delinquency. His reasons for leaving work on time to spend time with Hannah while his wife was undergoing fertility treatments were also exposed, subjecting him to scorn. Eventually, he quit his job and took on debt to pay me the child support I demanded. Now, Roy is trapped in a lifetime of debt hell, with his parents also collapsing alongside him. Roy works solely for debt repayment, and his parents can no longer enjoy a graceful retirement but must return to work. Their irresponsible blaming of each other led to daily disputes, so much so that the police were called for disturbing the peace. Now, they seem to be working quietly to manage the debt, complaining all the while. Afterwards, I moved back in with my parents, apologizing and living with them for a while. Thanks to my parents' support post-delivery, things eventually got better, and my former employer even offered me my job back as a full-time employee. I also arranged for my daughter to be taken care of at the daycare where my sister-in-law works, which was a relief. Now, living away from my parents, I'm a mother raising my daughter alone, but I'm managing well thanks to the support and kind words from those around me. I've decided to cherish these invaluable connections and raise my precious daughter to be a fine person.